Hello, I am Polygon's reviews editor Arthur Gies, and joining me is Russ Frushtick, who has reviewed Call of Duty Infinite Warfare for Polygon, and we're here to talk a little bit about that. How are you doing, Russ?
Very good, very good. I'm sleepy. Too much shooting, I think.
So much shooting, so much spacefaring exploration.
Yeah.
So, right off the bat, Infinite Warfare is the Call of Duty from Infinity Ward. Which is not the Infinity Ward that I think most people understand Infinity Ward as. It's not the people who made Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2.
There's a couple of people still there, for what it's worth.
It's like the dude who takes out the garbage, maybe, and a couple of other designers.
There are a few map designers and stuff like that that are still there.
But for the most part,
by and large, yeah.
It's a new studio in the studio space that used to belong to the people who created Call of Duty. And the last time that they made a game all on their own was Call of Duty Ghosts, which launched back when the next-gen consoles launched in 2013, and Ghosts was real bad.
Yeah,
Ghosts
it was awful.
real bad. So I guess my sort of caution starts there. When they showed the spacefaring stuff at E3, there was a lot of hullabaloo made about the space combat stuff, and I think when they showed the debut trailer, it has like the most dislikes of any video game trailer in the history of the platform. And that's anecdotal, obviously, and easily gamed. However, none of this boded well necessarily for Infinite Warfare. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think buzz has been pretty negative on this game. I don't think I remember like buzz being this negative pre-launch. Then like maybe World at War after Call of Duty 3 came out and Treyarch struggled putting Call of Duty 3 out, and then World at War came out and the buzz was like very negative on that too, and it ended up being a much better game. This feels like a similar situation where expectations are very low going in.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, it's not even necessarily that the buzz I hear is negative. I just don't hear any. I don't see a lot of anticipation or trepidation about Infinite Warfare. But as it turns out, that might be misguided.
Unfortunate, I would say, especially when it comes to the campaign.
So tell me about that. Tell me about Infinite Warfare's campaign.
Yeah, so I've played pretty much every Call of Duty game ever, and this is without a doubt
the DS Call of Duty.
Oh no! I was gonna say I played the Vita one, which was awful. I don't know that I played the DS one.
It was also
I might need to add that to my list. The Infinite Warfare campaign is excellent. It's really, really good, and by far the strongest aspect of it is the writing. The writing is really strong and interesting. It's full of characters that I care about, which is something that I really almost never see in shooters, let alone a Call of Duty game.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Modern Warfare and how you remembered the characters' names, and I think you invested in them a little bit, but I don't know that you ever really invested in them emotionally.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it was more the fact that, like, I mean, there are a few cute scenes with some of the characters, but they're pretty flat overall. By the time that game came out, there wasn't a lot of, like, character development in shooters at all, so like the standards are very low. And here, I mean, this isn't even a competition. Like, this story and the writing in this is worlds better than the original Modern Warfare. You're essentially a soldier who has to take command of a battleship in space, and under your command are a bunch of squad mates that have personalities and likes and dislikes and reasons for doing what they do and reasons they don't like one guy over another guy. And they're extremely well acted and well written and feel like whole characters, which just made me very attached to them more than I ever would have expected.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit as we were going over the review and sort of editing it, and I've got to be honest, like, I'm still kind of thrown for a loop that it has good writing, because that's definitely not something that Call of Duty has really ever had.
You're right. They hired a bunch of people who used to work at Naughty Dog, so that's a good reason for why things have turned around, especially since the writing in Ghosts was abysmally bad.
Oh, it was terrible.
I think it was awful. So I think they definitely took the note and were like, we need to ditch these narrative guys and bring in some people that actually know what they're doing when it comes to storytelling in games. And it seems like that's what they did. I would say that there's only one from a performance story weak point. The only thing that fell flat was the weird bit of stunt casting in the part of Kit Harington, who appears in the movie in the show Game of Thrones as Jon Snow. He's sort of like the Kevin Spacey insofar as like they wanted to get some press, so
They want
brought
somebody
in,
on the cover that they can sell.
I don't think he's literally on the cover, but they do want to get like
He's
hey,
in the advertising
maybe,
material for sure.
Oh, really? Yeah. So he's in the marketing. I get it. He looks identical to Jon Snow in the game. I think he has a scar, but otherwise, like hair, beard, everything, he looks like Jon Snow. And his character was just written very flat, and he's just like, I don't like you. Earth is bad. You're evil. Whatever. And it's not an interesting character. And thankfully he appears only a few times throughout. He is sort of your main antagonist, but it's not really the point. It is really more structured around your squad, and he is just sort of a footnote.
So I guess my question about the story before we sort of move on to how it plays is that you bring up the sort of veterans from Naughty Dog, and one of the things that struck me about Uncharted is that its characterization is always strong and its dialogue is always really good.
Yep.
But as far as like its narrative and its plotting, it's not really anything particularly special. It's sort of undermined by a lot of the things that video games are undermined by budget changes and schedule shifts and having to cut stuff. And so I guess my question is, does the story feel cohesive, or is it just full of relatable characters that you like?
I would say, yeah, the way you laid out sort of a classic Naughty Dog game is true, although I wouldn't say that applies to Last of Us, which I think is both great dialogue and a great overall story. Sure. But for in the case of Uncharted, and certainly in this game, I agree with you that the dialogue and personalization and characterization is very strong. Your end goal, I think, is a very simple thing, which is to say, you've got these people that are threatening Earth's whatever defenses, and you've got to stop them. So it's a relatively simple thing, but at its core, what they keep going back to is this idea of like, is the mission more important than the people under you? And would you sacrifice the people that you care about in the interest of completing the mission? And that's sort of the through line. So it's not like the most ambitious plot or through line at all. But I think by nature of having these interesting characters, in the same way that an Uncharted game sticks with you and you remember the people you saw along the way, it's the same thing here.
Okay, so as we've sort of touched on already and has been discussed ad nauseum, a Call of Duty campaign does not need a good story or good characters to be fun. But in addition to, we'll bring up Black Ops 3 as an example because it's the most recent one.
Yeah.
In addition to having a completely abysmal story with terrible writing and bad acting, Black Ops 3's mission design wasn't especially great. I didn't think that the campaign was especially fun at all. And clearly Ghosts had problems that went well beyond bad writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, from a strictly gameplay standpoint, this wouldn't be my favorite campaign, but it's much better than Black Ops 3. It's much better than Ghosts, certainly. I think a good Call of Duty campaign requires the feeling that you've got a lot of variety and a lot of like kind of a roller coastery sense of like going through these constantly surprising moments. And the core, normal gameplay, the boots on the ground gameplay, as it were, hasn't changed all that much, even from the original Modern Warfare. But the fact that because it's in space, you have a lot more environmental variety, which means, one of the missions that really stands out to me is you're on an asteroid, and the asteroid is spinning super quickly. So the sun, which is obviously not rising and setting, it's staying in place. But from your perspective, it looks like the sun is flying around the sky. There's like a 30-second day-night cycle, which is just like a very cool visual. And having the like core Call of Duty gameplay within these kind of crazy environments really helped. And it also, it really helps, again, to go back to the story, like when you're with people you're interested in and care about, it makes gameplay that might seem pretty familiar, much more interesting because you're more engaged with what's going on and you're worried about the people that are around you. Almost there were a few levels that have like kind of a Dead Space vibe, and a lot of that has to do with like, oh no, I'm worried about this dude to my right and left of me.
So one of Black Ops 3's problems was that it just didn't feel like encounters were particularly designed. They were just like these sort of slightly wide hallways, with some different variety and height that basically you just shot at things. Does this feel more designed? Does it feel like a better designed funhouse? Like, is it a compelling way of funneling you forward?
Sure. Yeah. I think it is, there's more variety to it, in terms of like the actual layout of the levels. Black Ops 3 felt very boxy. And I think the other issue with Black Ops 3 is the AI was very bad in Black Ops 3. There was a lot of like robots that just sort of like marched at you and had a ton of health, and it was crappy.
And it was co-op as well, and it had loadouts, and it had to sort of account for not knowing what you could do or who you'd be doing it with.
Yeah, well, there are loadouts in this as well, but no co-op. But I did find that it just moved a lot faster. And whether that was the gameplay or whether that was... I think it was mostly the gameplay insofar as there weren't those bullet sponge enemies that just slow things down dramatically. But again, the story just kept propelling me through. And then the other thing that kind of stood out was these spaceship segments where you hop in a starfighter effectively, and you've got full 360-degree control of where you're going, and you get in these dogfights. And it felt really good. I mean, it felt like a Battlestar sequence. And for being exotic gameplay, as they call it, like gameplay that isn't normal standard Call of Duty gameplay, it felt very polished and very thoughtful. Which really did help to break up like, oh, this is another boots on the ground level.
So other than the sort of flight missions, the space flight missions, there are side missions in this as well. Call of Duty has done side missions before. We talked about this a little bit as we were going through edits on the review. This is not the first time it's done side missions. Black Ops 2 did side missions, and they were pretty terrible.
They were really, really bad.
So how does this depart from that?
Yeah, so the Black Ops 2 side missions were like mindless, basically horde missions. You had to survive against like waves of enemies on a series of multiplayer maps. These side missions are actual like story-driven missions where you're... More often than not, a lot of them involve sort of flying towards an enemy spaceship, boarding the spaceship somehow, and maybe you're assassinating a guy on the ship, or maybe you're stealing some documents or whatever. They take about 15 minutes to complete, but they have like interesting twists in each of them. Like in one, I was able to put on an enemy uniform and go undercover, which was really cool. One of them like had an all-out battle after I escaped the ship where I'm like floating in space trying to get to my ship, and it was like kind of like an escape mission. So they have these like cute little twists on what's essentially very similar. They use a lot of the same like maps and models throughout these. Usually they're set in one of these like battle cruisers of the enemy ships. But it felt fresh because the objectives were very different. So I didn't mind completing them. And completing them unlocks various other like perks and stuff that you can use throughout the campaign. So there's a reason to do it. I don't think they're like world changing or anything, but it was a nice change of pace. And also, Call of Duty missions tend to take a while. They could take like 45 minutes to an hour to complete. Having these like short 15-minute missions was like kind of a nice alternative.
So I want to touch on that really quick. One of the things that Black Ops 3 did a couple of things with regard to mission structure that was very new to Call of Duty. Mm-hmm. One of them was this idea of loadouts, and Infinite Warfare has that as well. Explain that a little bit to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Essentially, you're just picking your loadout before you start the mission. So each mission sort of takes place... You start each mission in kind of a hub area, which again is kind of similar to Black Ops 3, but it's much more tied into the story because you're on your own battleship, but you head down, you talk to people, you walk around, you explore, but you eventually head down to the quartermaster, and in the quartermaster you can pick, hey, I want to start this mission with a sniper rifle and a silencer, or I want to start this mission with an SMG, whatever. He'll give you recommendations. I personally like having that option because it means that I can follow my own playstyle rather than being like funneled into whatever they want me to do. But yeah, I mean, I like it. I thought it was nice.
Are the conversation options new? I don't remember Black Ops 3 doing that.
There's not really conversation. You don't like walk around and talk to people. Sorry, I should be clear. You don't walk around and talk to people. It's more like you'll hear people having chats. Sometimes there'll be like a news report on the TV of a mission you just completed, and you can just like watch the news report. So that's sort of the spirit. You'll within the cutscenes and stuff like that, you'll see more dialogue, including your character. But as you're walking around, not really.
Got it. And so the other thing that Black Ops 3 did that I thought was pretty forward-thinking for the series and very player-friendly is that you could actually skip missions in that game. You could bounce around and sort of... They compared it to Netflix a lot as they were building up to the release, that you could sort of play the episodes you want, and if something was too hard or you weren't enjoying it, you could just skip along to the next one. Is that still an option, or is this much more linear?
I didn't actually know you could do that in Black Ops 3, but if I think it's more linear. I was never given the option to skip ahead. Given the nature of like how much effort they put into the story, I'd be very surprised if they wanted people to skip ahead. But I would say there are moments where you can continue on with the campaign, or you've got like 5 side missions to choose from. So if you want to do side missions, you have that freedom. But yeah, I think that's the extent of it. You can't like skip story missions.
So sort of moving on and keeping up with the Black Ops 3 comparisons, multiplayer in Infinite Warfare is very familiar. It sounds like as someone who played a decent amount of Black Ops 3 for review and didn't really have any desire to touch it, your review didn't exactly make me excited to dive into this one.
Yeah,
either.
I would not recommend, if you did not like the multiplayer in Black Ops 3, you are not going to like the multiplayer in Infinite Warfare. It is, from a gameplay standpoint, unless you're like a big time Call of Duty nerd like me, the differences are pretty minimal. Almost all of the movement options that you had in Black Ops 3 have carried over to Infinite Warfare, like wall running, double jumping. It all feels the same. That big dash slide, it all feels the same. You've got rigs that are essentially work the same way as the heroes did in Black Ops 3, where they have these ultra abilities that you build up power for and eventually can unleash. Yeah, I mean, it feels extremely similar. There are like perks that work differently and a few different perks, and obviously the maps are completely different and the weapons are completely different. But functionally, like every aspect of it has almost a direct analog to the Black Ops 3 multiplayer. I like the Black Ops 3 multiplayer. I really enjoyed myself, but I also realize that a lot of people do not like the way Call of Duty has gone since Advanced Warfare, which is like very mobile and quick, and verticality. I think this game is a little less vertical than Black Ops 3 was, but again, negligible, because you've still got the boost jump and you've still got wall running. So
I feel like the map design philosophy in Black Ops 3 was a lot different than it was in Advanced Warfare. Advanced Warfare felt very much like having multiple ways to get into and out of every space, really taking advantage of the verticality, whereas Black Ops 3 felt much more traditionally Call of Duty and not as much designed around the abilities, other than you can kill someone faster if you wall run and then jump over something as opposed to work around a corner.
Sure. Black Ops 3 multiplayer maps were all designed with a 3-lane mentality. So pretty much every map was 3 lanes. And if you were in one lane, it was generally very difficult to move from one lane to the next unless you're at like a shift point.
Which was like a weird esports thing, I guess.
Actually like it because one of the issues I really didn't care for Advanced Warfare multiplayer, and one of the issues I had was the randomness to it, which is to say I had no idea where people were coming from at any given time because everyone was so mobile and you could flow through the map at any direction you could. So I was constantly getting killed from behind, from the side, whatever. By having 3 lanes, although it does make it a little more predictable, it also cuts down on the frustration level, because you generally know where the enemies are going to be coming from. For Infinite Warfare map design, it's kind of a mix between the two. Not all of them are 3-lane, although a lot of them feel like that. There are a bunch that are kind of definitely more fluid, but still have the 3-lane nature, just like more ways to go in between lanes. Yeah, I don't find it to be design-wise all that different from Black Ops 3's campaign. There might be a little bit multiplayer maps. There might be a few more verticality options in Black Ops 3, but not a dramatic amount. Again, that's starting to get into like super nerdy Call of Duty territory.
So one of the ways that Activision has moved people from Call of Duty game to Call of Duty game is by making sort of demonstrable, difficult to deny improvements and fundamental changes from one installment to the next.
Yeah.
And this seems like the smallest jump that a Call of Duty game has really ever had from installment to installment. So I guess my question would be, what would be the sort of motivation or point for someone to leave Black Ops 3 if they're into it, if they're really aggressively invested in it, and jump onto this?
Why do people buy Madden every year? I mean, I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison, but I would say I think
Madden is held to pretty severe standards as far as substantive change from game to game, but also
I would say it's pretty negligible from game to game. If you're
So what are these sort of subtle improvements to multiplayer then?
Yeah, so they added a functionality called Scrap, which is kind of an interesting new resource that you can collect. You earn it by leveling up and by opening supply drops, which I'll get into in a second. Scrap can be used to craft specific weapons. One of the big complaints that people had about Black Ops 3 is that they started releasing these weapons that you could only get from supply drops, and the drop rate was terrible and the odds were very low. So by having this element of crafting, you can essentially save up a bunch of scrap and unlock whatever gun you want, which is a nice aspect. There is one minor issue to that, is that there are guns that are exclusive to supply drops and you can't craft them. But the idea is, as new guns get added, those guns that are currently uncraftable will become craftable. So it's really just a question of whether you have the patience. I think it's a cool system. I like the idea of like saving up a resource and so that you're able to unlock something that ordinarily you would have to just like hope for the RNG gods to bless you. So that's kind of like a nice addition. I do have concerns about like balancing those guns that you can work for. Like if you spend 3 months trying to unlock a gun and then they nerf it, like what's the, that's kind of a drag. But I like the idea of it, certainly. The other improvement that they made, which actually is more dramatic than I thought it would be when I first saw it, is this thing called mission teams. You basically can select a, quote, team before you start any match. And within that team, you're given these objectives before each match. The first team you're introduced to is called the JTF, and their objectives are very simple. It'll be like kill 5 guys, or use 5 rig whatever things, or get 5 hip fire kills. They're like very straightforward. And as you do more of those objectives, you'll level up your team, and the team will then grant you guns that are exclusive to that team. You'll also get camouflage exclusive to that team, so on and so forth. So that's kind of interesting in that it gives you this sub-objective that you can be doing while you're playing the game. And even if you're getting like totally demolished in a match, you have something that you can be doing, which is kind of a nice alternative. As you progress on, the mission teams have different focuses. So the second team you unlock is all about objectives. So they want you capturing points or score, earning team score, stuff like that. So I like that it caters to play style and it gives, yet another carrot. Call of Duty is very good about carrots. And I like that I have something to work for, even if a match is like a total loss.
Which I think is fair. I do like that Call of Duty seems to be making like at least some overt gesture towards giving people who aren't awesome at multiplayer a reason to play, because I feel like the sort of RPG carrot is not a big enough carrot for the stick that you have to sort of tolerate now, because so much of Call of Duty, if you're not awesome at it, is a meat grinder. now.
Yeah.
So the team thing seems pretty smart.
Yeah, it's definitely designed for like a more casual audience, although obviously the hardcore players will take advantage of that. And I like that it's there. But also, I mean, the meat grinder aspect of Call of Duty hasn't changed. Like, this is not, apart from that aspect, which kind of makes it a little more rewarding, the gameplay is not more welcoming than it's been. It's still very brutal, especially if you haven't played a shooter or a Call of Duty game in a while. You will get trounced for a while before you start kind of getting the feel of it. And that's sort of just the nature of where Call of Duty is right now. And honestly, a lot of shooters, like you play Battlefield, you'll get pretty well steamrolled.
I feel like Battlefield is big enough, and the sort of kill potential is reduced enough that you will live long enough to get your bearings a lot more than you would in Call of Duty.
I think what Battlefield offers players that aren't good at shooting things, it offers other tasks, whether that's reviving or reloading and stuff like that. You don't get that in Call of Duty.
And that used to be something that Titanfall did as well, though it does not do that as well in Titanfall 2 as it did before.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when people go for a Call of Duty game, they don't necessarily want to be, I mean, they might play Search and Destroy with their friends or whatever, but for the most part, they just want to like a very tight, sharp, fast shooting experience for the multiplayer. And it's not about team play, and it's not about like dropping med packs. It's just about the shooting, and the shooting still feels great. I mean, they still did a very good job. But yeah, I mean, it's really just depends on what kind of shooter you're looking at. Yeah.
So I guess to sort of wrap it up, we'll move to the thing that I personally have never really liked and have never really got and have always found sort of the antithesis of fun, which is zombies.
Yeah.
Which is, I know that's blasphemy to some people because some people are just truly obsessed with zombies mode in Call of Duty. But it's definitely here. It sounds like zombies is no longer a Treyarch thing. The last Infinity Ward Call of Duty had a weird, bad alien survival mode.
Yeah, it was real bad.
It was real bad.
It was like a horde attack thing.
Yeah, a poorly executed one in virtually every regard. A lot about that game could use those adjectives. Yep. So tell me about zombies, because I don't know that you're like the biggest fan of zombies, but your antipathy might be less than mine.
Yeah, I mean, I've played the other zombie maps. I've like gone through the Easter egg on a few of the maps, so I have the experience of playing a fair bit of zombies. But I feel like you do, which is to say, I find it very unwelcoming and very difficult to the point of frustration. I think Treyarch zombie maps tend to be very esoteric, especially if you're trying to do the Easter egg, where you're doing these outlandishly vague objectives and you don't know why you're doing them, and you have to watch like an hour-long YouTube video just to understand what's going on. I don't find that to be the case with this zombies map. I find it much more welcoming. You start off, it's an 80s setting, and you're in this like space-themed theme park, and you're just, without knowing anything about it, really very little when I started, I was able to survive for a much longer time than I normally am in a zombies match and have fun. Like, there's like a lot of like weird side items and objectives and little traps that you can set and stuff like that. It just felt much more welcoming than it has in years past. I was getting tool tips on like how to use certain items, which is like a big no-no for Treyarch. They love being very vague about how to do things. So the fact that like an item that I picked up was like, hey, you should throw these on the ground and shoot them and it'll light on fire.
So it feels penetrable in a way that previous zombies modes were not.
Yeah,
so much.
Exactly. It definitely feels more approachable. There's like a help menu. There's like a map that you can in single player mode, you can like look at the map and like see where all the areas are. So I think, I can't speak for the like end Easter egg because people are still trying to hatch that, if you will. But the core like minute to minute gameplay, even like just starting out, feels very fun to me. Like, it feels light and goofy and enjoyable as a co-op experience. If you hate zombies, I think it's not different enough to make you love this mode necessarily. But if you have played a little bit and have been kind of turned off by the difficulty, but the core concept sounds interesting to you, I think it's definitely worth giving it a shot.
So it's not just that I find it too difficult. It's that the guns in previous zombies iterations have not felt effective. Like they feel sort of purposefully weak against zombies. And is that still the case?
Well, all of the zombies maps have been designed where the deeper you get into it, so the more rounds you go through, the more health the zombies will have. So in round 1, you can headshot them with a pistol and they'll go right down. In round 5, a pistol's not going to be very helpful to you. So that's still the case. A big part of zombies is like finding better weapons and finding eventually the Pack-a-Punch, which is like the first step to the Easter egg, and that's still in there. So, but I think those like first 5 to 10 waves where like you have no idea what you're doing and you're just sort of exploring and messing around feels much more enjoyable than it has in the past. Again, because you feel like you're doing damage and like making progress in ways that it hasn't really felt in the past.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will be curious to see it. I'll probably end up trying it because I have friends that play it. But
yeah.
So,
I think it's worth an evening at the very least.
Sure. So to sort of wrap things up, the conclusion to your review, I think, sums it up a bit. It doesn't feel like it's especially reinventing the wheel.
No, I mean it's for zombies and for multiplayer. I mean, in both cases, it's a very safe game. A lot of people. I realize a lot of people didn't like Black Ops 3, but for those that did, and there was a pretty diehard fan base around that game, I think that's really the audience that they hope will continue on, because they haven't, really changed either of those multiplayer or zombies modes that dramatically to scare anyone off. But for the campaign is really exceptional, and they really did a great job with it. And I think that certainly is the standout aspect of Infinite Warfare. Multiplayer and zombies are both good, as I said, like very strong. Like nothing in this game feels weak or not super thought out. It feels like a very solid. It's like a crazy from like just like a time invested standpoint. Like it's kind of crazy how much stuff is in here, and none of the stuff feels bad. And some of the stuff, specifically the campaign, feels excellent. So. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like, if you're into these faster Call of Duties, these more modern, futuristic, jumping around kind of Call of Duties, you will enjoy the multiplayer, if not find it to be too redundant. But the campaign, again, is just, like, superb, and there's zombies to fill in the time in between.
All right, well, you should be able to read the review on Polygon.com, which is a website, by the time this video is live, which I believe has a score and everything. So you should check that out. But Russ, thank you so much for answering my penetrating questions about Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
Thank you for joining me, Arthur.